Excellencies, friends, ladies and gentlemen, gives me a great pleasure to share with you some thoughts on this important topic on leaving no one behind and the role of human rights in reforming the sovereign debt architecture and going beyond GDP. Only wished that I had managed to join you in this important discussion today in person. I'm attending here in New York the discussions on the preparation for the Finance for Development Fourth Conference to be held in Seville in Spain. And I'm very much pleased to have the opportunity through the recording to share some points. I hope that they could be useful for your important discussions today. At the outset, may I highlight three important principles and goals. First, that the promotion and protection of human rights and implementation of the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda are interlinked, interrelated, and mutually reinforcing. The second principle is that human rights must be integrated in states' implementation plans to achieve their SDGs, in line with the human rights-based approach to development. The third, any reform to address the current deficiencies in the international debt architecture must prioritize human rights, social justice, and equity to prevent vicious debt cycles, like the one that we have been witnessing for many years now. These three principles and objectives must not only constitute an integral part of the sustainable development discussions, but must also be translated into actions. The magnitude of current debt crisis cannot be undermined today. Global public debt has reached a staggering figure of $97 trillion and growing. External public debt service to government revenues has gone up by almost double from 2010 to around 9% in 2022, and again growing. The number of developing economies with net debt outflows has more than doubled since 2014. The surge in debt servicing obligations forces developing economies to implement austerity measures, often resulting in cuts to essential social and public services that disproportionately affect the most vulnerable and the most needed in the populations. Alarmingly, 3.3 billion people today reside in countries where governments spend more on debt repayments than on essential public services such as health, education, and other essential services. In the African continent, 23 countries are currently allocating more funds to debt service than to health or education, putting immense strain on economic resources and the future generations' ability to engage in economic life and to contribute to development. In other words, while these countries are managing to avoid defaulting on commercial debt, this outcomes has a significant cost. Specifically, developing countries, many of them today, are defaulting on the SDGs. The current frameworks addressing debt distress, such as the G20 Common Framework, the Debt Service Suspension Initiative, the DSSI, and the Global Sovereign Debt Roundtable, the GSDR, have not effectively tackled the pressing issues at hand. Also, the standard multi-year process for partial relief has proven not to be effective and very much challenging in many aspects. This has been manifested in the following: limited and reluctant participation of major creditors, including private lenders; the failure to address liquidity problems of private businesses, banks, and large corporations; and the restricted eligibility to few low-income countries by not including middle-income countries, that many of them are vulnerable as well and in need for help. Accordingly, while half of low-income countries are either in debt distress, exactly 11 countries, or at high risk, 24 countries are at high distress. Only 4 of them are undergoing debt restructuring. Depending on a variety of factors such as responsible lending and borrowing, the loan terms and conditions, the effective use of loans, and efficient debt management, debt finance can contribute to fostering economic development and advancing human rights at the same time. Nonetheless, empirical evidence shows that in many developing countries, the fulfillment of debt service obligations is often undertaken at the expense of human rights. The high and unsustainable debt burden have diverted national resources from fundamental public services, including, as I said, education and health. But can I add to that as well, based on evidence, the deterioration in essential utilities and support through water systems, sanitation, housing, and infrastructure? All of that had been sacrificed for debt service, and in many cases only to pay the interest, not to repay the principal of debt. The limited fiscal capacity of debtor countries undermines their ability to establish the necessary conditions for the realization of human rights. So let me share with you what we are trying to do now, given that there is a new mandate that being given to a group of us to help in the operationalization of the recommendation that will come out from the Seville process and the discussion that are happening as we speak now of the texts of the outcome document. A group of prominent experts mandated by the UN Secretary General, I have the honor to be one of the co-chairs of this group, asked to promote actionable policy solutions to resolve the debt crisis. I believe that it is very much an opportunity here to explore how human rights can guide the global debt architecture review. This objective corresponds to SDG target 17.4 on assisting developing economies in attaining long-term debt sustainability, and Action 50 of the Pact for the Future on accelerating the reform of international financial architecture so that countries can borrow sustainably to invest in their long-term development needs. Furthermore, the SDG Summit of the year 2023 and the Summit of the Future of the year 2024, their outcome documents reaffirm the critical importance of achieving the SDGs for all segments of society without leaving anyone behind. Happy as well that in my capacity as the UN Special Envoy on financing the 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda, I invite all relevant stakeholders to develop and refine framework for measures of progress on sustainable development that factors human rights in a way that complement and goes beyond GDP. This objective corresponds to SDG target 17.J and Action 53 of the Pact of the Future. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, no reform of international debt architecture would be effective, fair, and sustainable if it does not integrate among its objectives the perseverance of dignity of people through avoiding any retrogressive measures affecting economic, social, and cultural rights. As we approach the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, we need to explore ways of advancing the reforms of the global debt architecture in a manner that pays particular attention to the realization of human rights for all, specifically the rights of the most marginalized and vulnerable communities among us. This is why today's meeting is timely for providing guidance to all stakeholders on how to articulate a universally applicable framework on debt and human rights that is designed to ensure that debt obligations do not undermine the capacity of countries to create the conditions for the realization of all human rights, particularly economic, social, and cultural rights, and the right of development. It is evident that a new debt architecture is needed with a twofold objective: Can I start by the first objective, which is basically about resolving current debt crises in accordance with human rights standards and norms? And then, of course, we need to prevent future crises from happening. Our common target that requires very much concerted international action in the spirit of international cooperation and assistance is to deliver an equitable and enduring solutions, not only in line with the political commitments made by the international community in the SDG summit in 2023 and the summit of the future in 2024, which need to be further strengthened in the discussions and the outcomes of the Finance for Development International Conference in Seville, but also in consistence with the human rights obligations of all states.